And welcome to our hopefully last lecture for Chapter 25. We're going to be talking about the pH scale and acid-base balance versus imbalances. So the pH of our blood is regulated to about 7.4, between 7.35 and 7.45, so it's slightly alkaline. And it has to be maintained so that proteins can do their functions. There are multiple mechanisms in place to maintain our blood pH. We have the respiratory buffer system, we have the renal buffer system, and then we have our chemical buffers. So the pH scale is inversely correlated with the amount of hydrogen ions. Hydrogen ions actually lower our pH, so if we have a high amount of hydrogen ions, we're going to have a low amount of pH, which becomes very acidic. If we need to bring our pH up to homeostasis, we have to lower the amount of hydrogen ions. We're always taking in different amounts of acidic or alkaline substances to our body, and these are going to affect our pH. So we're constantly having to use respiratory or renal buffers to make sure our pH stays maintained, or chemical buffers. So what are some of the things that cause our pH to drop? If we take in a lot of carbon dioxide, or I won't say take in a lot of carbon dioxide, if we have a lot of carbon dioxide in our system. So people that have trouble breathing, that have emphysema and can't push the carbon dioxide out, are going to have more acidic blood. And so they're going to have to use the renal buffer system and chemical buffers to help decrease the acidity of their blood. Different acidic products. So we have acidic beverages, we have acidic proteins that we can take in that cause our acids to increase in our body, which then is going to cause our pH to lower, as well as keto acids or lactic acids that are also going to decrease our pH. So our kidneys are going to respond to this by taking out the bicarbonate, sending the bicarbonates back into the blood and excreting hydrogen ions. They're also going to produce new bicarbonate ions. That is going to increase our pH back to where it's supposed to be. This is a lot more common than having an increase in pH, which would be this one. So when we have a decrease in the amount of hydrogen ions in our blood, and that means an increase in pH, we're going to have to get rid of the bicarbonate and reabsorb hydrogen ions. So the reason we might have this problem, which is not as common, from extreme vomiting, where we're getting rid of all of the hydrochloric acid in our stomach, it could potentially cause our pH to rise. And then an overdose of antacids. And so typically that's not going to happen. Most people are not crazy. They're not going to like start taking lots and lots of antacids. But think about the flavor of antacids. Some antacids have a really good flavor. They're almost like candy. And so if you have your bottle of Tums antacids sitting on your coffee table because you just, took 2 or 3 and you set it down and you're maybe walk into the kitchen and you're doing something and your child or your niece or whoever sees that bottle and thinks, oh, that's candy, because they're also pretty colors usually. They start eating it and they eat the whole bottle. That would be an example of overdose of antacids. And that could increase your pH and cause problems. We also have a respiratory buffer. So we talked about the renal buffer, but we have a respiratory buffer as well. The respiratory system is going to eliminate carbon dioxide to bring our pH back up and decrease the amount of carbon dioxide we lose if our pH is too high to lower our pH back. So here's an example of assuming we have too much hydrogen in our system, so our pH is low. We're going to be able to increase our pH by shifting the amount of carbon dioxide from our blood to our lungs. And this is called a chemical shift to the left. So we have this bicarbonate ion that's in our blood, comes in to the blood cell. That's that chloride shift we talked about. Chloride moves out. Bicarbonate mixes with hydrogen. So we're decreasing the amount of hydrogen. Hydrogen and bicarbonate come together forming carbonic acid, which then immediately disassociates to carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide is breathed off, and that's going to cause our pH level to increase because we're getting rid of those hydrogen ions. The opposite happens if our blood is too alkaline. So now we're going to take and slow our respiratory breath, our rate, which is going to lower the amount of carbon dioxide we exhale. So carbon dioxide and water mix together, forming that bicarbonate. Bicarbonate breaks down into a carbonic acid, or I'm sorry, not a carbonic acid. The carbonic acid breaks down into a bicarbonate and the hydrogen ion. The bicarbonate leaves the blood. Chloride comes in. That's that chloride shift again. And this is to the right. And that hydrogen ion is going to increase our blood pH. So here are the two basic buffer systems that regulate our body pH. But we also have chemical buffers that are going to come into play, especially, so they are immediate. Respiratory system takes only a few minutes, and the renal system, the urinary system, can take a few hours. So it takes a lot longer for the renal system to really kick in and start controlling the pH. Less time for respiratory system. But buffer systems, chemical buffers, work immediately. And so we have three basic buffers that we're going to use, okay? They're going to buffer the pH to help it stay at about 7.4 until the respiratory or renal system can start working. So we have a protein buffering system within our cells. We have a phosphate buffering system within our cells, and then we have the bicarbonate buffer system in extracellular fluid. This is going to help maintain our pH until our respiratory system responds, and then our kidneys respond. So, I guess I didn't mention. Protein buffering system and phosphate buffering system are very important intracellular buffering systems that will maintain the inside of our cells pH, and then the bicarbonate works on the blood plasma. So let's talk about some of the disturbances associated with acids and bases. We have two major disturbances. Acidosis, where our blood pH goes below 7.35, and alkylosis, where our blood pH goes above 7.45. So we need to maintain that pH all the time. So what types of acids do we have? There are volatile acids. These are gases that we can eliminate as carbon dioxide. And then we have non-volatile or metabolic acids that have to be excreted, like lactic acid, be an example of a non-volatile acid. If we have a respiratory disorder causing an acid-base imbalance, then the kidneys are going to be compensating. And if the kidneys don't compensate, then we're going to have either a very low or a very high pH, depending on what's going on, typically low pH. Acidosis is much more common than alkalosis. In a metabolic disorder, the respiratory system must compensate. So the kidneys are working as hard as they can't do anymore. Respiratory response is typically very quick, within minutes. Renal response is very slow. So with a respiratory disorder, you're going to end up typically in acidosis or alkalosis before the disorder is compensated. And compensation is not correcting the problem. Compensation is just helping to maintain the pH until the problem is corrected. So respiratory acidosis is due to excess carbon dioxide. So people with like emphysema, they can't blow the carbon dioxide off. And so that carbon dioxide builds up in their blood, and that causes their pH to decrease. And that's when the kidneys have to excrete the excess hydrogen. They have to produce more bicarbonate and make sure that we reabsorb all the bicarbonate we can get to help maintain our pH. Respiratory alkalosis occurs when we don't have enough carbon dioxide. So this would be like something where you are hyperventilating. So you're blowing off so much carbon dioxide, you actually will get dizzy and you oftentimes will pass out. Metabolic acidosis is going to be an increase in some type of an acid or a severe decrease in bicarbonate. In both cases, it's going to lead to an acidosis. So I always talk about lactic acidosis or ketoacidosis. Those are the two that I'm most familiar with. Lactic acidosis occurs when lactic acid builds up in your system. Ketoacidosis typically is associated with diabetic high blood glucose levels because it's not being cared or it's not being controlled. Metabolic alkalosis is loss of metabolic acids like the hydrochloric acid from the stomach, something like that. Or, again, a metabolic increase in bicarbonate. All right, so let's look at some figures that show respiratory acidosis and alkalosis versus metabolic acidosis and alkalosis. There are a lot of different symptoms for each. So this is just a cute picture that shows what's going on with respiratory acidosis. Your pH is low because we have a high amount of carbon dioxide that's being left in our system. Typical causes are COPD causes like your emphysema, pneumonia, stuff like that. There are other causes as well, but those are some of the most common type reasons. Here we have respiratory alkalosis. So in this case, our blood carbon dioxide levels are very low. So that's causing our pH to increase. The most common reason for this would be hyperventilation. Metabolic acidosis, your pH is below 7.35, and with metabolic acidosis, we're looking at the amount of bicarbonate ions. So bicarbonate ions are also low. This means it's a kidney problem, and our respiratory system is hopefully starting to function to try and get rid of some of that extra acid by blowing off more carbon dioxide. And then here's metabolic alkalosis. This video here at the bottom is an RN NCLEX video, and it's called Compensation Tic-Tac-Toe Method. Look it up. It's really good.